Hi, I'm Scott Carey. I'm an editor at techworld.com. I'm joined today by Czech Warner, one of the founding partners at Ada Ventures. Hi, Czech.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. We sat down and spoke last year for this same series about the work that you were doing at Diversity VC. Since then, you've gone off and you've founded your own fund. How was that process for you? What went into that process?
Yeah, it probably sort of seems like it was a faster process from your perspective, but when we did last speak, I was in the midst of our fundraise. So it was about a 17-month process, and it was really about kind of coming up with a strategy around why investing in overlooked founders and overlooked markets was going to generate fantastic financial returns. Yeah. And then it was shoe leather. It was just meeting hundreds and hundreds of investors, going around the world, and ultimately we've ended up with a $34 million fund. We've got investors from several continents, and we're really delighted to be starting to invest in January of this year.
Yeah, and so the way I understand it is a lot of the work that you did at Diversity VC, which was really focused on shining a light on the issues in the industry where there is not enough diversity and inclusion at the VC side. But what that obviously showed you was on the founders side as well, there was this gap and this funding gap. And what you wanted to do, I guess, is come in and fill that gap. Is that broadly correct?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, when you kind of post-rationalize it like that, a little bit more kind of strategic and like it was all planned out, but it really wasn't. I think it was a real gut feel that myself, Lillian, Travis, and all of us who do Diversity VC had around something has to be done to try to make this problem go away or address this problem in some way of lack of diversity in the VC industry. But also I was lucky enough when I was working at my last fund to invest in quite a few companies that were led by diverse founders. And in many cases, I saw their experience in terms of their fundraisers and how much more difficult it was for them than it was for the atypical or the typical founder. So it was a kind of combination of both things. And then it was a shared passion for this topic that I had with my co-founder, Matt, as well.
And you talked about the experience of going out there and raising your first fund, a lot of shoe leather, a lot of meetings. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what was it like for you as well, from someone that has talked a lot about the gaps in the industry? You know, the networks tend to be kind of boys' clubs and you know these people and that's how you get your institutional investors. How was it for you as a woman getting out there and getting involved in that process?
Yeah, it was incredibly expensive, is one thing which I think people don't necessarily know about. But you know, one aspect of that is the GP commit, which is the amount of money you have to put up if you're raising a fund, which is typically 1% of the fund. So for us, it was £300,000 that we had to kind of somehow come up with. And whenever we went to speak to our first prospective investor, that was a question that they would ask. Plus, it was all the expenses of 17 months of living without an income. Plus it was the flights, it was the regulation, it was the legal work, it was everything that goes into raising a fund. So that was really eye-opening. Yeah. I think another part that is kind of the same as what founders experience when they're fundraising is that it's so reliant on networks and who you know. And we didn't really know very many people, it turned out. We thought we maybe knew more than we did, but we had to kind of do everything from scratch. And I think we came across, a whole range of different characters in that fundraising process, some of whom didn't really believe in diversity and inclusion, or that it would make any money, or that women could make money. And, we really heard everything you can imagine in terms of types of no. Yeah. And in fact, from a lot of people, we just heard nothing. So from sort of hundreds of people that we spoke to, just never ever got back to us. So I think it's been, we made a film about it because we wanted to share our experiences and make that more open and transparent so that other people could hopefully learn from it. We're also about to write a blog and publish it on what our learnings have been, so future people don't have to go through it. Yeah. But I think it's given us it's a cliche, but a huge amount of empathy for what founders experience.
It makes like the process of saving for a mortgage sound small fry.
Yeah, that's gone on the back burner very firmly.
Yeah, that's good to see where your priorities are. Did the work that you had done with Diversity VC help put you on the radar of some of these people? Did that open any doors at all? Yeah, you mentioned that it maybe closed a few doors in people that weren't kind of bought into that idea, but
yeah, absolutely. It's been a phenomenal platform to get to know the industry, be more visible in the industry, and that's a huge part of building any kind of personal brand. So I'm kind of grateful, I guess, to the opportunity that I've had with Diversity VC to kind of get exposure to people I wouldn't otherwise be in rooms with. I think there's not that much overlap in terms of the limited partner community to what we're doing with Diversity VC, but I hope there'll be more in the future. And hopefully the experience with Ada has opened my eyes to how much more work needs to be done around enabling people who come from diverse backgrounds to be able to raise funds. So, for example, the financial support with GP Commit or getting some kind of stipend so that it can cover living expenses. Because, another thing that was really visible when we were raising our fund was how few fund managers are women or people of colour or have any kind of diversity. And I think until that changes, it's going to be really difficult to change it lower down the stack.
And what's your future involvement with Diversity VC look like? It's obviously a massive passion project for you, but it sounds like you've got other kind of pulls on your time now.
Yeah, it's sort of always been that way in that myself, Lillian and Travis and Ben and Seb and everyone else kind of who works on Diversity VC, we do it kind of voluntarily alongside day jobs. And so that just is kind of continuing as it's always been. But we are really excited because we've just hired someone on Diversity VC. So we've got some more support than we've ever had before. So I hope that's going to mean that we can move forward more quickly and that we don't become the roadblocks to progress.
Yeah. And let's talk about your fund. Let's talk about Ada Ventures. You mentioned the experience that you've had in terms of, finding underrepresented founders in the past, and I know that you've got a fairly unique approach to kind of unearthing those gems. That's always been something I've been interested in. Is it's a great idea in theory, but how do you actually find these people?
Yeah, and that's also what we thought. It was a great idea in theory, and is it going to work?
Yeah.
And when we first started doing it, we were quite pleasantly surprised because what we've seen over the course of the last 17 months, because while we were fundraising, we also were making investments through these special purpose vehicles, and we were using this sourcing model to make those investments, is that we saw about 20% of our deal flow come from this network. And even better than that, we've actually made 2 investments now that have come from introductions from that network. So, we find people through lots of different methods. Some of them introduce others. So if you run a community that's focused on LGBT tech founders in North Wales, you might know someone else who's running a community who's looking at mothers in technology based in Edinburgh. So sometimes there's sort of peer-to-peer introductions. Sometimes it's people that we meet through kind of every day. Sometimes it's people who come inbound and contact us and say, can we work in this way with you? So it really varies, but it's exciting because we've got sort of 45 of these communities now that give us this huge reach into something like 10,000 underlying entrepreneurs. So it really leverages our time as investors.
And one of the things we talked about when you were kind of representing Diversity VC on this last year was making things more transparent is always going to help bring new people into the ecosystem. And how much of your time at Ada goes into kind of teaching these founders how to play the game a little bit? You get some founders who grew up in this world of Oxford University and they went to McKinsey and they understand the lingo and how to do it. How much of it is an education piece as well?
Yeah, I think it's a huge part, and I think it's something that we're already finding, and it's super early days. We've been kind of actually investing for about 3 weeks, so TBC. But one of the things that we're seeing is that we are ending up spending quite a lot of our time doing things like giving talks or being part of podcasts or video series or things that make venture capital and that whole fundraising process more transparent. And I don't think that that's sustainable. So we're trying to find kind of hacks or ways to, better leverage our time. But one of the things that we've done is we published our investment decision-making framework, which has been great. And already we've seen that founders have taken that and actually like written investment papers based on their company and sent them to us. So that's the kind of thing that really validates that approach of if you put stuff out there, founders will take it and they will play it back to you, and that makes your life easier because you've got it in the format you want it.
Yeah. And I know that your investment strategy is overlooked founders, but is there any particular kinds of companies that you're really interested in at the moment?
Yeah, so it's both overlooked founders, but also overlooked markets.
Yeah.
So for us at the moment, the overlooked markets we're really interested in are women and, in general, non-heteronormative populations, which are not well represented, as we know, in VC and tech. So we think there are lots of kind of underestimated problems that those populations face that haven't had venture-backed products and services addressed to them. So fertility, for example, is one kind of big area. I think femtech in general is another one for women. We are also really interested in the ageing population as a overlooked market. So we are looking at kind of future of work solutions in that space. And then finally, customers under the age of 23, which is a slightly sort of different one. But again, because that population isn't represented within venture, we think that they face more challenges to the sort of specific products and services targeted to them than other markets.
Yeah. And in your day-to-day work at Ada, how much of the stuff that you learned at Diversity VC or a lot of the practices that, the best practices that you evangelized have you brought to that side of the party in terms of not just the hiring you do as a fund or the work that you do as a fund, but also helping founders build that diversity into their companies from day one, without having to go back and start doing it again later on down the line?
Yeah, I think lots, and that's the huge opportunity I think we've got, not just our investment strategy, but the kind of end-to-end of how do you do diversity and inclusion well throughout both us operating as a fund, but also the companies that we fund. So to give you a real example, we've got built into our term sheets, the company has to have a diversity and inclusion policy that we have to review and check and get comfortable with within 6 months of us investing. In terms of our process, we're slightly obsessed with decision-making and how you can make really good, high-quality decisions. So we've thought a lot and researched a lot into how do you make those decisions objective and using kind of things like scores so you can compare across, using kind of characteristics around what founders' qualities are versus where they went to school. Yeah. So we started on all of that, but I think that there's like a lot more to come. Yeah.
And finally, I'd be remiss to not talk about kind of the broader industry because that's something you've always taken such an interest in. How quickly do you see the landscape changing? It's been a few years now since you've been really focusing on getting more diversity and inclusion into the industry as a whole, and we've often talked about the pace of change being a little bit too slow for our appetites. Have you seen any kind of drastic changes there, or does the work keep going?
I don't know if drastic would be the right word to use. I think, the level of engagement is certainly higher than it's ever been. I think something that's really encouraging is that we're seeing the Treasury and government and the British Business Bank and big institutions coming in and actually putting real policy in place around this.
Goldman Sachs.
Even Goldman Sachs, exactly. So what next?
Yeah.
But I think there is still a long way to go, and I think the issue, as it's always been with venture, is it is such a small industry that when your hires are being made at a pace of kind of one a year or even less, and especially at partner level, it just ends up being really difficult to see rapid change.
Yeah, and that awareness level is certainly changing, but the actual practical steps, as your last report showed, there's been a little bit of a slowness or reticence to put those actual hard policies in. So I guess we can only keep doing what you're doing and keep advocating for it and hope that change happens, I guess.
Yeah, and we've actually got some really exciting work in the pipeline that will be announced later on this year that's around trying to make that best practice policy really tangible and really easy for those funds to put in place.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's definitely buy-in, but I think there's less good understanding of what that actually means.
Great. I love to finish on a tease, so we'll finish there.
Yeah.
But best of luck with all of your work at Diversity VC and at Ada for the year ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.